Well, we are indeed privileged to have with us a member of the Harvard crew to share with her expertise, not only in scientific instruments, but in an interesting role, as you read in your program, that developments in astronomy are going to spill over into economics and the marketing world, whether it is a spectacular instrument like the Palomar telescope or Halley's Comet. Some of us remember generated all kinds of commercial metaphors that were laughable because we all knew Halley's Comet wasn't going to be bright in the sky. But anyhow, so please help me. I want to point out that Sarah's book is available here for purchase. I'll let you say something about that.
There's a little shameless commerce division here. So one of my specialties internationally is the history of sundials, and I'm cataloging the chief curator of the two largest collections of sundials in North America, one at Harvard University and one at the Adler Planetarium. And I'm in the process of cataloging the Adler's very fine collection of some 500 plus sundials of all different sorts, many from the Renaissance and so forth. And this is volume 1. And it was published just right before the pandemic, but I have a couple of cartons of these books. So if anyone would like to buy one, they're lavishly illustrated in full color, and I will open up, they're all come wrapped, but I will open up one so you can see inside. And they are heavily subsidized by the planetarium, so they are only $40. And this thing weighs multiple pounds. You hurt your foot if it drops on it. And it's full of very beautiful pictures of sundials and cultural interpretations of them. So it's neat with the catalog, but every class has an introductory essay about the people who used them and made them and how they were made and so on, and symbols about father time and so on.
It's very good.
Yeah, so we have testimonial from the grantee who has actually read it and wrote a book review on it. So I won't pass this around now because I want you to look at my talk and not the beautiful pictures in here. But afterwards, I will have a copy open available. And if any of you would like to buy it directly from me, then from the Adler, where you have to pay for shipping, I'm happy to autograph it or not, depending on your choice. You may say, no, go away. But I'm happy to sell you a copy at the same price you would get it from the Adler. Okay. Well, let me use the mic. I think that might be better. Okay, so I want to thank you for inviting me here. This is my first Astro Assembly, which has really been too long since I moved to this region of the world, but I'm really happy to be here. So today I'm going to talk about astronomical advertising and bringing the stars home. Okay, well, celestial bodies have evoked wonder, and many companies took advantage of the symbolism of astronomy and its instruments to market their products in the 19th and 20th centuries. D-Zerta drew on the anticipated return of Comet Halley in 1910 to launch its new pudding. And the James W. Smith Cigar Company similarly issued this collectible Edmund Halley cigar label. Excitement over the opening of the world's largest telescope in 1949, the 200-inch telescope at Palomar Observatory, was used to sell Buicks and bread. And my talk today will examine how images of astronomical instruments, be they of great observatories like you see here, or telescopes and sundials and portable instruments, and representations of astronomical concepts were used to sell consumer goods and lifestyle choices. Now, these images are found on 3 principal kinds of ephemera: vintage trade cards, consumer product packaging, and magazine advertisements. And I'll close my talk with some thoughts on what we learned by looking at all these things. You know, it's fun to look at them, but we can learn something too. And the time frame that I will be dealing with will run from about 1860 to 1960. So let's begin. Okay, so the first half of this period was the heyday of Victorian trade cards. And these were small pasteboard cards that took advantage of the new technology of chromolithography, in short, color printing. The marketing idea to issue colorful collectible trade cards was the brainchild of Jacques-Aristide Boucicault, the owner of the Paris department store, Au Bon Marché. And starting around 1850, he offered a different colorful print each week or so to children visiting this store with their parents. And this promotion was usually successful. Soon after this, other large businesses commissioned their own exclusive designs to sell foodstuffs, tobacco, and sewing machines. And here we see trade cards for Van Houten's cocoa and a chocolate for Guérin Boutron. Smaller shops could employ stock images that had blank spots on the front and back for the sales pitch. So like here you see the same cards used for two different companies, and you can see the back has different information on them. The cards are often humorous, they're pretty and educational, and they'll feature not just fun scenes like these little clown-like figures, and I'll come back to these clown-like figures over time. They seem to pop up with a lot of people looking through telescopes. I don't know what it says about us astronomers, but the cards will often have things like anthropomorphic hats, like engineering marvels, foreign cultures, paper dolls, puzzles, things that you can manipulate. Well, most stock Victorian trade cards with astronomical imagery, I have found, make little to no effort to connect the astronomy to the product or service advertised. They exhibit a world of fantasy and fun. So take, for instance, this image of what I'm calling James and the Giant Peach, which is for a millinery shop in Pawtucket. Again, we see the little clown-like guy, the wizard. Or this lady here gazing at a sundial in the pre-dawn moonlight, the fourth quarter moon. And this is for a Providence business selling artistic gas fixtures. Of course, right. As I'm out in the moonlight at dawn gazing at my sundial, I'm thinking I would be inside if I had to get an artistic gas fixture. All right. Or, you know, here we see this audacious young astronomer riding a crescent moon in an ad for a chocolate shop in Paris. And on the right, we see a Pierrot who's tricking his young assistant by dangling a croissant at the end of the telescope. This is for a French bakery, Biscuit George, that catered to children and specially made lunettes, which are what we call croissants.
That's what we do with that.
Right, that's exactly, you know. We'll see the little huckster image that will show up too. So when astronomers are not depicted as clowns or wizards or both, they are street corner stargazers or hucksters offering pedestrians a peek. The stargazing scenes often feature children dressed up as adults or performing an adult teaching role, like the little girl instructing her doll over on the far right of this slide. It makes sense because the cards were intended to appeal to kids who would pick them up and then, you know, collect them, and then they lie around the home and other people would see them and think, wow, I want to go to that store. The cards that I show here on this slide are promoting haberdasheries and sewing thread. Sometimes the cards came in like a series, and here are two. This pair was issued by a chicory vendor in Paris, I believe. And it shows students carefully observing a comet. They draw it, try to photograph it, and look at it through a telescope. You know, these are all really super, ways, astronomical practices to make an observation. My scarf. But you see, one poor kid is completely tuckered out. He's asleep at his desk. These trade cards are simply meant to catch the eye of consumers, as I said, and they'll take them home and remember the shop they got them. Now, other trade cards do try to take advantage of an astronomical practice or idea, such as sweeping the sky to find a comet and astronomy's potential to be newsworthy. And that is to say, they allude to the work of seeking something out and the joy in finding it. They want consumers to see their product as notable as a discovery in the heavens. And this is why comets and asteroids frequently appear on these trade cards, I think, and could be used to great advantage. So let me show you a few examples. This is one of my favorites. Here, pigs with a telescope make a great discovery, Dr. Haas's hog remedy in 1882. On this interactive card from 1881, it reads, "What drives the comet through the skies? Inquiring little Johnny cries. Hold to the light, my son, and see the wonders of astronomy." So this is a card where you hold up to the light and you're going to see something in that big patch there, that big like coma. Can you guess what it would be? I'm sure you won't. So I will tell you, the light running Webster wagon. We all need one of these for sure.
I never drove one.
So now here is an American fellow, a kind of creepy version of Uncle Sam in striped pants. And so here he is. And he's observing a blazing comet, which, if you look closely, is wearing a top hat and smoking a pipe. We've seen guys like this at Cellophane, I think. The comet announces Harrison's Town and Country ready-mixed paints. Wow, who knew? And the paint cakes, it also says the paint cakes of the world are waiting to be filled. Each keg has an observer with a telescope on top of it. If you look closely at the kegs, you'll see some disquieting racial stereotypes in the facial features of these kegs, which are placed in Asia and Africa and Europe. News is carried on telegraph lines, reading, "The world hails your advent with pleasure," not the comet, the paint, I guess, and greeting, and at the bottom, "Oh, I see the comet." So one could unpack this kind of imagery in many ways. I won't take the time here, but it gives us, insight into the culture of the day. Now here we see kids with a do-it-yourself telescope to observe the comet of Warner's Safe Yeast. The telescope's conveniently fashioned from a canister of the yeast. And some of us have made, from oatmeal canisters and things, little telescopes and stuff. Now this product was part of the patent medicine empire that made Hobart H. Warner a millionaire. Warner used his fortune to build the Warner Observatory in Rochester, which was completed in 1882. He also created various comet prizes and financed Lewis Swift and E.E. Barnard. Here, so there you see one of the product of another of his products, patent medicine, the safe cure for kidney and liver, and the observatory, and this telescope here. And when we compare this trade card with the telescope to an actual photo of Lewis Swift in the Warner Observatory at the same year, we see that this is actually a depiction of that refractor. And it's showing Lewis Swift with the 16-inch Alvin Clark telescope that was at the Warner Observatory. So here's a case where the picture is not totally fanciful. Like you probably noticed that especially the mounts on some of these, where the hot pigs are looking to a telescope, so the mounts are often kind of afterthoughts that don't make any sense, but this is a real image. Now, the advertising campaigns featuring the comet of safe yeast and the comet of hog remedy and paint and light wagons, these actually may have been inspired by the recent, at the time, apparitions of the great comets of 1881 and 1882. So they're probably, the timing isn't just random. This trade card for D-Zerta vanilla pudding in 1906 took advantage of Comet Halley's anticipated return with the expression, all eyes on the new creation. So instead of a comet in the sky, use the orbiting D-Zerta quick pudding box. And all these folks looking at it with their telescopes. Trade cards also took alluded to the discovery of minor planet Eros in 1898. And here's a good example. So here you see, the discovery of the orbit of a giant black-tipped sturdy children's shoe. It says, the distance of this newly discovered planet from the Earth is yet unknown, but the saving by the introduction of the silver and AST company black tips upon children's shoes has proved to be millions of dollars annually. Parents try them. And I'd like to point out, if you look at the Earth there, the giant shoe-shaped shadow on the Earth of the orbiting 1882 shoe, as it travels, the shadow is going between the cobblers at their benches and various people with telescopes. The discovery motif, sometimes with a splash of astrology, was also adopted by soap manufacturers. Cleaner days were announced in the stars on this promotion of Soapine by the Kendall Manufacturing Company of Providence. Fairbanks laundry soap used a street huckster to get attention for its heavenly wonder. When people step up for a free peek through the telescope tube, they read "Buy Fairbanks soap," and an astronomer on the right inside a dome discovers Craddock's medicated blue soap only costs 10 cents. This advertisement took the discovery theme further and shows how well the public was keeping up with astronomy and local events. Now, the ad appeared in a local newspaper during the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And at that World's Fair, Yerkes telescope was on display. This was before it actually went up to Yerkes Observatory for installation. And this ad for Kirk Soap references the telescope and also the popular idea that canals were seen on Mars with powerful telescopes, the so-called canali, and that this implied the existence of Martians. So And as everyone knew, a good Martian must be a one of a good soap. So Kirk soap, to be exact. And so there was money to be made here. And of course, Charles Yerkes, the railroad magnate, was already building a cable car line to Mars to carry loads of Kirk soap. So you see that on the, if you look closely here, you see here's the loads of Kirk soap on this line, this trolley, and here's Mr. Yerkes and his expensive telescope, CU, Chicago University, Mr. Yerkes cable to Mars, hooray! And here's Kirk soap, and here it is on display in a trade card from the World's Fair. Now, Victorian trade cards don't always get things right, and they were often inserted into product packaging as a premium to encourage more purchases. This is kind of the forerunner of what we know as the baseball cards and chewing gum packs and things. And the cards can be found on various topics and themes. So firms selling meat extract, chocolate, and foodstuffs included images of famous astronomers and famous astronomical instruments, but not always the correct ones to go with the person depicted. For example, on the left, we see Copernicus between Hevelius's quadrant and Fraunhofer's heliometer, two instruments dating from 100 to 300 years later than Copernicus. And in the middle, Kepler has an 18th century Gregorian telescope. He would have loved to have one of these, but they weren't around for another 150 years. Cards were issued in sets, I've mentioned this before, and they can be quite beautiful. Liebig, a meat extract company, put out many different kinds of sets of these trade cards. And here I show one example of a set of 6 cards about marvelous luminous objects in the sky. You know, comet, aurora borealis, eclipses, and so on. And now the depiction of scientific instruments in the foregrounds of these cards are real historical instruments. They're not fantasies, but they don't relate accurately either to the phenomena shown or the time and place of the people using them. So, for instance, in this center of the top line, we have a Greco-Roman man in a toga who's observing Donati's comet in 1858 with a cross staff. You know, this is like everything is wrong in the relationship, but it's a very pretty image. Will's Cigarettes and other tobacco firms use trade cards to stiffen the packs, and collectible cards came in series of 25 to 50 cards. The ones I show here are pulled from diverse sets on the themes of romance of the heavens, measurement of time, engineering wonders, this mechanized age, out into space, and one other series called Do You Know? Sundials and clocks were another popular topic for collectors, and I include them there here because they are related to astronomy. And here are some examples from Will's Cigarettes and Fry's Chocolate. Now, these are the series, as I said, that evolved into baseball trading card, including the packs of chewing gum. And so, like the chewing gum cards, you were encouraged to buy more chocolate or more cigarettes to get the next, you know, to build up your collection of cards. Now, speaking of chewing gum, consumer products have a history of evoking or of cloaking themselves with astronomy-related names and packaging. Now, you might be surprised to learn that Orbit chewing gum was launched by William Wrigley Jr. in 1899, more than 100 years ago. This 1907 promotion here that I'm showing the slide declares high as the stars in quality. Good for the molar system. The piece on the right is interactive, so you can make this like moon figure chew the gum, and it says the gum I choose, you know, there, along with the molar system, but there you have it. Now, the Mars Candy Company got its name not from the planet, but from its founder, who was named Frank Mars. But they couldn't resist the opportunity to name its first big candy bar hit, Milky Way, in 1923. And farmers of healthier foodstuffs were not going to be left behind and drew on astronomical imagery to promote their brands of fruit and vegetables. And there's a really beautiful aesthetic to these. A lot of them come from California. And what you see here are crate labels from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, especially from California growers. I think, you know, that it helps that the fruit is golden and roundish and readily imagined in orbit for, you know, this constant depiction of the moon and so on. But I'd like to, the one on the right, which is in Spanish, a label from a Spanish company, which says Nuevo Planet, Planeta, is referencing the discovery of Pluto. Again, we have the wizard guy, our clown. Now, Buicks and Palomar observatories were sometimes featured on these crate labels and can labels. And here are examples of that. Again, they're very pretty. Now, astronomy's razzle dazzle has been used to pitch products for a long time. Some of these may still be in your cupboard. Maybe have sunlight soap in 1884 and how it appears today, if you find it to buy. I think it's mainly sold in England. And of course, our old friend Comet Cleanser. I'd like to turn to magazines from these ephemera, trade cards, and product packaging. Around 1900, magazines introduced color printing inside their pages. And unlike the trade cards, the advertisements were not simply cute or fantastical images of astronomy, but more clearly connected to a product's characteristic that related to an astronomical instrument, method, or an astronomical worker, albeit sometimes in really silly ways. The first group I'm going to show are perhaps the most obvious and straight faced. These are companies who were proud to have been associated with the construction or operation of famous observatories and hope to trade on that engineering experience. So this is an example of Firestone truck tires, who in 1916 bragged that its truck tires were rugged enough to make the grade, having hauled parts of the Mount Wilson telescope up the hill. It says they transported parts of one of the world's stiffest trails to build the world's biggest telescope. And what I love about this yet is it's one of the few pictures we have of actually that process of building the telescope, showing how the parts have been hauled up the mountain. In 1936, Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, boasted that its aluminum paint was good enough for the dome of the 100-inch telescope at Mount Wilson. And in 1939, it gloried in the use of aluminum coatings on the 200-inch mirror planned for Palomar. The future looked really bright. The Griffith Observatory is featured in a 1936 ad for concrete by the Portland Cement Association. And the solar telescope at Kitt Peak was the star of an ad for Westinghouse in 1963. Other advertisers had no role in building a celebrated observatory like Palomar, but the public's excitement led them to jump on the bandwagon. Prince Albert Tobacco offered a comic book approach to the 200-inch marvel at Palomar Mountain. Here, tourists visit the observatory and excitedly remark, "This giant telescope will be an enormous help to astronomers." Gosh, I thought I finished that subject in my last year of school. Quiet, please, and pass the Prince Albert. And then through all the various parts of the ad, they're looking at different parts of the observatory and the telescope while smoking this tobacco. It's kind of a nightmare, but that's it. Other advertisers drew upon astronomy in humorous ways, at least to me, and not always intentionally humorously. So here, for example, Mobil Oil urged auto owners to take the long view, that is, pay more now to save later, when it came to protecting their engines. But those are some pretty weird asteroids, I would say. Two life insurance companies, Connecticut General and New England Life, use the telescope as a symbol for looking ahead and hopefully in the right direction. As you see the guy on the right, it says, "My insurance company in New England, why do you want to ask?" You know, about to be hit by some astronomical, meteorite, or who knows. Now, royal typewriters, inexplicably to me, associate a medieval astrolabe with the complexity and usefulness of its typewriters in 1920. And in 1927, Packard compared its engineering prowess with Galileo's pioneering measurement of interstellar space, as they put it. But if you look closely, Galileo appears to be looking through his geometrical military compass, which was a mathematical instrument we would call a sector, rather than through his telescope. Telescopes illustrated in magazine ads also convey the act of discovery. Kind of, look here, this is a heavenly product. It promises an out-of-the-world experience, be it a roll of lifesaver candies in 1956 or plush carpet from Lee's around 1950. These weird ads for Hanes underpants in 1957 and Munsingwear bras in 1948 have a voyeuristic edge. Who ever thought it was a good idea to combine telescopes and underwear? This is for like jockey shorts in 1959. Now, sundials were also icons for the passage of time and endurance. And they were featured in ads as well with these sentiments. First sentiment I'll talk about is the issue of time flies. Here we see Daggett and Ramsdell's Perfect Cold Cream advertisement around 1910 with time's advice to beauty. The damsel was warned, beware the finger of time. You know, with it, and Father Time there, this lethal instrument is, lauding it over her. Or on the right, we see Bell's aircraft ad from 1941, casting tomorrow's shadow. And this is more forward-looking, but gives a new meaning to time flies. On the subject of endurance, one of my favorite ads is this one for the GE refrigerator with the monitor top. You see the refrigerator is the gnomon of the sundial, which is like giant, like building size. And it says tough tester time. That's from 1927. On the right is an ad for Union Carbide's chromium, the metal that makes time stand still. And that's in 1954. The hunk of chromium there in the person's hand was about to crush the sundial. And then there are the reference to counting hours and years, the passage of time. Not necessarily in an endurance way or a sinister way, but just kind of a happy anniversary way. So FTD, Flores Telegraph Delivery, ad here says, say it with flowers by wire on those happy birthdays and anniversaries in 1950. And you see the lady's leaning on a sundial thinking of the flowers she's going to get. Sapolio soap has a soap for every bright hour in 1909. Again, the gnomon is the bar of soap. And it says on the ad, Good Housekeeping recommends, quote, 100 uses for it indoors, outdoors, in city, country, or seashore homes. The stable, garage, and yacht all need it. So you get a picture of who they're marketing to in Good Housekeeping at this period. And then there's round the clock fashion. This ad for Naturalizer shoes has a shoe for every time and occasion in 1942. And sundials also represent the taking of time out, be it for like a coffee break in this A&P coffee ad, where the sundial's part of the garden table. It says perpetual motion, a kind of play on perpetual motion. And on the right, the happy hour. Sundials appear a lot in happy hours. And here's one for Budweiser beer in 1951. There seems to be a thing for whiskey bottles as gnomons on sundials. Here are 3 examples from Kentucky Tavern, Old Forester, and Four Roses. These ads from 1950, 1953, and 1944. Indeed, the association of alcohol and astronomy intrigues me. In the Paul Jones whiskey ad from 1946 on the left, no person is shown, but the caption reads, "Mind if I keep my eye on the bottle, Professor?" Since the star chart is on the floor, he might have drunk himself under the table. The Canadian Club ad from 1940 features an expedition to witness the Cerro de Pasco solar eclipse in Peru in 1937. It shows rugged, shirtless men observing the eclipse before taking up the bottle. The Miller High Life ad from 1910 exhibits the good time to be had by astronomers in Milwaukee, looking at the High Life girl in the moon. Right, the telescope is a converted bottle.
Maybe not converted.
Yeah, maybe not. And again, this probably was, inspired by the return of Comet Halley that year. Well, you see the stars in the sky are pretzels and foaming beer mugs and some stuff, I'm not sure what it is. So astronomy and alcohol, gives us the impression it must be for for thinking men, manly men, partying men. And who can resist a star party? Be the guest men in white dinner jackets for arrow shirts in 1938, looking through a telescope at a constellation of shirts and ties, or whatever, as in the Swatch Equinox party ad in 1988, which reads, Swatch Watch. Spirited gathering takes time to probe meaning of equinox. Finding none, they party. But seriously, briefly, women are seldom depicted with telescopes, and when they are, they look ridiculous in high heels and cocktail dresses. Now, I know all you women in this audience, isn't this how you go out to observe as a secret company? Right. Check out these women shopping for blankets and rain and stain protected garments. So on the left, we have an ad for national blankets in 1947. Sensational as a comet, the ad promises. Scientifically planned for warmth without weight. The blankets were made of 88% rayon and 12% wool, quote unquote, developed after years of research by Nashua scientists. On the right is an ad for Silmer protective finish, a clothing, a textile sizing or finish made by Dow Corning to waterproof garments in 1958. The use of a telescope on these ads to represent a scientific discovery to women, I think is done because a chemical apparatus really won't do. There's kind of an assumption that in these products, if they show the materials of a chemistry lab or something, it wouldn't be as clearly interpretable as a new discovery. A telescope kind of evokes that. It's a simpler concept, more known to people. Now, even advertisements that promoted the purchase of telescopes to amateur astronomers could not resist placing attractive women next to them as eye candy. It's like, yeah, my telescope is this big, and look at this lady who's coming to look through it. And women were not taken seriously. I mean, and these weren't just like separate advertising brochures, but the one on the left for Becker telescopes is from Sky and Telescope. These are very common. You don't have to look hard to find them. I'd like to compare these two ads. On the left, we have an ad for Viceroy cigarettes, and it's showing from 1959, and it says, "The man who thinks for himself." And this is probably the only, it's referencing probably Edwin Hubble and the 60-inch telescope, Mel Wilson and stuff. And he's holding a loop, and it's probably the only ad I've ever seen with an astronomical glass plate photograph in it, which you can see, here. He's looking at, can you see it? So when at first it's like kind of a goofy thing, and here he is smoking, and there's the plate and the loop in his hand. So that's pretty cool. But then on the right, we have an ad for Cos Cobb clothing from 1963. And the woman in this case is looking through a pretty serious observatory quality telescope. And she's enjoying it, but the label copy reads, I'm going to read it to you. "How beautiful," she cried as she watched the moons of Jupiter move magically on their course. "How beautiful," she heard him echo softly, feeling his fingertips lightly brush her cheek, and then move slowly across the shoulder of her woolen blazer dress, a Cos Cobb classic. Yes, it's kind of creepy, right? I mean, she's trying to do something serious and he's like, ooh.
He's serious too.
His view of the night is different.
I think he was on. Go with the ad for the lawyer next.
So, and these were like, thought to be, good ads. I mean, these are not, they weren't today. We see them in a different way because of our understanding of harassment and stuff. But, at the time, this was seen as, a great way to sell clothing.
That never worked for me.
Wear those clothes and you get felt up in the observatory. Yes, he was on a different trajectory. I like that. Where is that in the audience? All right, and so you see this very different way men and women are depicted on these ads at this time. And so to close, let me just say, so what's the point of looking at all this ephemera with its romanticized, comic, historical, and puzzling images, which are designed to catch the eye of consumers? Well, in general, ephemera is stuff that wasn't meant to be saved. It's meant to be thrown away. It's like the daily newspaper, the wrapping of your soap box, and stuff. But it tells us a lot about people's lives in a given time when it does survive. And it shows us slices of daily life in the middle and upper classes, because those who would be making these purchases or owning these magazines and stuff. It shows us gender roles, reaction to current events, whether it's building the Palomar Observatory or an event. Some of them may show react to the Cold War or something like that, as in the Bell aircraft ad. It's also showing us fashionable clothes and interiors, how people of a certain group lived, what they ate and drank, and celebrities of the day, be they people or like the Palomar telescope. It also gives us an insight into the advent and reaction to new industries and technologies, whether it's aluminum coatings and paint or more durable truck tires. And various educational methods, sports, games, and popular culture, and not just what people ate, drank, and smoked. So by looking at astronomy through this representation in consumer marketing, I think we enrich our understanding of its place, of astronomy's place in the general culture. And we learn, moreover, how astronomy has contributed to or has been colored by these various issues in the culture. And how what the public saw as its defining characteristics, because they could build off them in this marketing. It had to have a certain level of recognition to make this marketing roll, because you talked about H alpha line of something, the brand public would be like, what? I don't understand that ad, So I'm going to stop here, and I'm happy to take questions. But I hope that you enjoyed this view of various kinds of advertising materials and ephemera. Thank you.
Questions? Betsy?
If most of these were meant to be thrown away, how did you ever find so many?
Well, a lot of, I'm a historian. That's what we do. We look at the stuff that people would throw away, as well as printed, published records and things. And in my case, I also look at instrumentation. So that's would normally be consumed and thrown out, not necessarily preserved. So it took a lot of time and research. Some of these, I've over many years have been collecting Victorian trade cards on eBay or other ephemera. I, looked through, old journals like, Sky and Telescope and things like that for this stuff. And so when I find it, I've just kind of made a note of it, copied it or bought it, and to create my own private collection of this ephemera. And over time it built up a better understanding of what it might tell us. So it's a product of over a decade of hunting for things and thinking about them.
Will there be a book?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. Not sure if it. It's always the problem. Who would publish such a thing? I think it would be attractive and fun, and could be a nice little popular book. But it would be a matter of a publisher. They may think it's too arcane. It's just for astronomy geeks and historians, and but I think it could be like a nice, you'd want something that would be like a exhibition catalog, lots of images, and so that people could really see the pictures and think about them also for their own resources as historical record. Yes.
Yeah, obviously some of those cards were in an era before you were born. So
Yes,
where did you get those?
like from places like eBay.
Really?
Yeah, so like there's a whole area of eBay that sells Victorian trade cards. So if you're interested in, there's tons of things on the sewing machine companies and spool cotton and like Lee Big's meat extract. It was a big, and so these things, it's like looking for, they're dealers, people will find this stuff and flea markets, and they'll sell them. And so I searched through that stuff with like search words like telescope, comet, so strange things that may show up in the search. Sometimes there are things, of course, that the owner who's selling it doesn't know is, like, if I said looking for astrolabe on a Victorian trade card, probably the person who has it wouldn't know it's there. That's what the thing is. But it's sort of, once you're in an area, if you look for astronomy or some, a key word, you find a lot of junk, but you start to find certain things. I also collect greeting cards with sundials and telescopes and things on them. And there's a whole array of things, whether it's, how the kind of way the iconography has been used. And in connection with this work, I'm also interested in, before this era, say the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries and early 19th, of the depiction of women in astronomy settings. And how they appear, and very often that almost exclusively, always, except with one exception I can think of the wife of Thebalius, Elizabetha, they are depicted as Astronomia or Urania, the muse of astronomy, as a goddess who may be telling, often with in the frontispieces of books and things. And so you have Ptolemy there, and Astronomia is looking over his shoulder going, this is how you do it, So it's a very different depiction of women. Again, very gendered. They're not the users of the tools, but they may be surrounded by the instruments of astronomy. Sometimes they may be the muse, like, of geometry or mathematics and stuff with the astronomical instruments that they're making. Yes.
You spent a number of years collecting this stuff. Is there any place that it could go after, someday later on? I mean, or is this all going to end up in the dumpster because nobody wants it? I mean, what do we do with all this?
Well, that's a great question for for any curator, whose collection, some of which came out of dumpsters. I don't know what my plans are for it, whether I would, you know, try and pass it on to another collector or donate it to a library, because the value isn't really, it's more value of the assemblage, not like any one card is, you know, so valuable. But yeah, I haven't really thought that out. I mean, this is like, as all collectors, it's what we do with our collections. We spend time building them and loving them, and we hate to see them broken up. And yet, most institutions don't want the whole thing. They want, because they have the duplication or they want pieces. And so it really depends how you see fit to pass it on. I don't want to just throw it in a dumpster, of course. I'd rather pass it on to a like-minded individual who wants to keep building on it. If I'm just gonna, you know, give it away, throw it away, or, you know, not to an institution, but I don't know. Yeah. So, and in the red jacket.
I was gonna say just a few things, very interesting topic. So I used to collect some of those things. And eBay certainly is one of the best places to go to if you want to look for those and acquire them and build them. Also, I would say that certainly archiving them would be important. Archiving for history, getting them digitized, maybe donating to historical society or things like that, private collectors, because we want to be able to preserve all that. And
Yeah, it would be better not to split them apart, having now gathered, and it's kind of a very much a niche sort of collection. You know, I don't know how many other people have done, you know, collecting this sort of thing.
I think it would make a good book too, because it's, yeah, I think what you have there is a crossover market, or markets. Because you got astronomy, you got vintage card collectors, you can probably think of maybe one or two more. I think it would have appeal.
Okay, well, I'll keep that in mind. I would sort of like to do something with it that has, you know, some lasting effect, but, yeah.
She's gonna
So I know in the back there, you were next.
Just what I mentioned, if you ever consider a museum or gallery exhibition of your collection, that would seem like a very appropriate way to present it to the public.
Yeah, it could be, you know, it would be, now see, I'm a museum curator and I do exhibitions, and the thing with these kind of, a lot of them are small, so they're, you know, like you're actually getting a better view on a screen. So it's a very special kind of exhibit because people have to get up close, and unless you enlarge them, and then you could do it, you don't have to be in a physical space necessarily. And objects that are made of paper can't be on display for very long, but you could do a short-term thing. I sometimes use reproductions or the originals in exhibitions I've done at Harvard on astronomy and popular culture, for example. Some of these are related parts of my collection I've brought out to make a point. Yeah. Yes, and back there.
Do you have any explanation for why telescope mountains are always shown out of balance in the Earth? That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Right, that's right.
I think that the artists don't have a real telescope in front of them. They're drawing from what they think they remember. And they just never paid any attention to it.
And have clearly never been near or looked through a telescope.
To understand the importance of the mounting. But yeah, this is like constantly, like in almost every one, the mounting is so goofy. I mean, my husband and I are always laughing about them. And even on our wedding cake, we had a recreation of a transit of Venus scope, and I was looking through it out of sugar that the wedding cake maker made. And she had a picture And our friends who looked at this wedding cake, look at it and they go, like, isn't there something wrong with them? Why is that piece attached to the ribbon and to be over here? And we're like, you know, the baker, what does she know about, you know, she got this to look, you can even recognize a telescope, it's good, you know?
Pictures, but somehow the declination axis wound up sticking out.
In some weird way, you know, so even when they're trying, like, I find that people, like in my line of work, I find that people, if they're just looking at a picture of an instrument, they don't realize the functional relationship of the parts. They see things, you know, next to each other, but they don't realize one thing is behind the other and, you know, supporting or coming out a different part. So when I have students describe an instrument from a picture, I get this really weird, you know, the knee bone is connected to the ear and, you know, the elbow to the belly button, and you're like, ah, you know, because they functionally don't understand what they're seeing. So I think that's part of it. And so that you need to have a more specialist understanding of the object, and certain things we have in our daily lives that we see all the time, like a book or whatever, we know that, but something like a telescope is unusual for most people. The other part is I think they just don't, they're not worried about it. You know, they're just, here's a tube, pigs are looking through it. We recognize the icon telescope, the fact that it's on some weird fork mount, that, you know, it's no stranger than the pigs looking through it, okay? So I think there's a couple of things here, and just of not paying attention or not knowing, or not caring, you know, that's not the message they're trying to convey.
So the optical tube assembly does not stick out through the slot in the dome.
Yeah, that's another.
Yeah, we see that, right? We see that. We also see there's some of the things like on greeting cards, the telescope is like zigzag shaped, but they're not intending some kind of bent optical path. They're just, you know, they just don't know, like, it can't be that way. So I, you know, there's artistic license and all kinds of things going on here. But even that is I think, is telling. It tells us what people see as this iconic instrument, what they know. They think tube, right? And they think eye at the end. And so you rarely see anybody with like a Newtonian telescope or the more other types we in the room are familiar with. It's it's kind of the public interpretation of this, you know, but that tells us what the public sees when they think telescope. They think this one kind of thing, but they don't think about it too much because they don't know how unstable that would be, you know. Yes.
What else?
Oh,
But
who was next? It was, and there's so many questions, so why don't you pick one, Scott?
well, Rick had his hand up for a long time.
Okay, Rick.
Sarah, when you were doing your research, the universal theme of astronomy is always the refracting telescope, so they seem to go together. Did you see any other themes to sell products? It seems like the only thing we're talking about is astronomy and telescopes, but was there any other subject or theme or instrumentation to sell other products like we have here?
Sure. I was looking for this particular way of selling products, but sometimes there are themes that might be on, you know, just speed and quickness and, you know, how fast you can get something, or, you know, some attribute like that would be desirable, or other sorts of cultural traits, like sometimes the idea of the globe or the world, or industry, or there are lots of different ways that things have been marketed. I chose this as a particular filter to look more closely at and just sort of tuned out the rest, but,
Will you be available to answer more questions?
yes, I'll be around all day and into the evening. I'm happy to answer more questions one-on-one or groups. And so I'm gonna turn the program back over to Scott so we can move on.
Okay, thank you.